Well, this is part two of our answer to the question, if God has a plan, why do we pray? In part one, check it out if you haven't already seen it. In part one, we looked at how we pray because our prayers actually change God. They change his mind. He rolls our request and our gratitude and our praise into his plan in a way that means our prayers actually impact what God's plan is and what happens in this world. And so we definitely want to take advantage of that and pray. In part two, this second part of our answer, we're going to look at that not only do our prayers affect God, our prayers affect us. They have a whole bunch of different impacts on us, which means we should pray. Right? The first of those reasons that we should pray because of the impact it has on us is this. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17, Paul writes, pray continually. Right? We have a command from God to pray continually. That means that when we pray, we're choosing to obey. Right? And when we choose not to pray, we're actually disobeying God because he's told us that we should. And we need to be careful of this, that our own human reason and logic and our own things that we don't understand don't stop us from obeying God, that we don't use them as an excuse to disobey God. No, the first reason that we need to pray and want to pray is because God tells us that we should. But there's more reasons as well for why we should pray for our own sake. One of the effects prayer has is prayer keeps us humble, because prayer is a continual admission that I can't do this on my own. I'm not in control of that. I'm not powerful enough to look after that. It keeps us feeling small. Right? And that's actually a really important and helpful place for us to be spiritually, is feeling small, feeling like things are beyond our control, because things actually are beyond our control. And when we feel like we can control everything and we place that burden on our own shoulders, it's a weight that we just can't bear. We actually need that humility, and the best way to get that humility is to continually go and talk to someone who is much bigger than us, and that's God. And that rolls on to the second thing that it does for our hearts. If we're humble, that then helps us to trust. Right? If we're humble, it helps us to trust, because if we feel small and then we go to God and he feels big, then it makes more sense to us to leave things in his hands. That as we pray and as we bring our requests to him, and as we thank him, and in doing so we recognize all the ways he's been faithful in the past, all of that adds together to help us trust God more. And perhaps if you struggle to trust God with things, one of the things you can work on more is to pray more. Thank God more for the things that he has done, and bring more of your worries and more of your anxieties and lay them at his feet in prayer, because it helps us trust him. And another reason for our own sake that we want to be praying lots, irrespective of God's plan and what the outcome is going to be, is because prayer builds relationship. Right? We know this as humans, right? We don't speak the minimum number of words in our lives to purely convey the amount of information that we have to convey. And we talk lots more than that. We ask people for things that they already know that we want. We thank people for things, which is kind of redundant. They've already given us what we want. We talk so much more than we have to. And why is it that we do that? It's for relationship. It's so that we get to know one another and share ourselves with one another. And the same is true with prayer and our relationship to God. That sure, God can do his job with us ignoring him and not talking to him, but he doesn't want to just do his job of running the universe. He's our Father, and he wants to hear from us. He wants us to open up our hearts to him as he reveals himself to us. He wants us to pray. And so if you feel like you're distant from God or a long way relationally from him, one of the ways to work on that is to pray and pray and pray and pour your heart out to him to grow your relationship with him. Another reason that we want to pray is because it actually directs our heart, it shapes our heart, it shapes the thoughts and inclinations and desires of our heart when we pray. A couple of ways it does that is praying helps us to think beyond ourselves. Because as we pray pray for others, we pray for this world, we pray for all kinds of different things. Jesus tells us we should even pray for our enemies, and it helps move our hearts beyond just ourselves. And it helps steer the way we think about those things. If we're praying for our enemies' good, it's hard to keep them our enemy for too much longer. When we're praying for others, it inclines our heart towards them and towards being kind to them. And so we want to be doing that regularly. And the other thing it does to our hearts is it helps us move our hearts in line with God's will. Here's why that works. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone, saying something to someone, and as you were speaking, you kind of heard your words through their ears? Like you realized how this must sound to them. And that kind of changed the way you thought about what you were saying. Well, the same happens when we pray. That as we pray, we kind of hear what we're saying through God's ears. And sometimes that will encourage us and we think, man, this is exactly what he would want me to be praying. And there's other times perhaps where it challenges us and we start to feel foolish in our own eyes as we imagine how we look in God's eyes. And the more we pray, the more we start to see ourselves reflected back through God's eyes and through God's ears. And that helps move us into alignment with his will and how he wants us to be thinking and feeling and praying. And so for all of these reasons, because it's obedience, because it brings humility, because it helps us to trust him, because it directs our heart in all of these different ways, we want to be praying. And that's all on top of the fact, part one, that God actually listens to and responds to our prayers. Because we don't primarily pray for God's information, but we do pray for our own transformation. I hope that these couple of answers have been helpful to you and will encourage you to pray and pray and pray even more to our great, loving God.